Hello and welcome to this workshop, an introduction into UX research for non-designers. We are senior designers and we have designed many products so far. However, we do need allies amongst customer-facing professionals, you, to be able to create better experiences for them. The reality is, designers don't just design and then see the results implemented. Instead, we influence. Influence the decisions of product managers, influence the priority of features, even influence the details of front-end implementations. Designers create easy experiences for the users. But it's not uncommon that design solutions are quite tricky to implement. We don't enjoy being trouble starters, but we just have to bring a bit of overhead to feature implementation. We know all teams have tight deadlines and are always limited in available resources. Unsurprisingly, any overhead from us isn't really welcomed. However, the situation changes dramatically if we could say, that's not just our ideas, that is what the customer explicitly wants. Our overhead becomes a part of customer brief, not just our designery fantasies. In this workshop, we're going to cover the importance of the research for the company. Actually, any company creating enterprise software. We will go through an intimidating list of problems of getting proper feedback. Then, when things will start to look like very dark, we will show several techniques UX designers or researchers use to uncover real problems. In the end of the day, you might start thinking, oh, it's too complex. And maybe it's a good idea to allow the designers to do that research themselves. That would be a very valid point, although there are much more many customer-facing people than designers. You might be able to communicate with users in a full bunch of situations which are impossible to imitate on design workshops. Moreover, you could have an access to the users we will never have access to. We're going to give you some knowledge, some awareness, so that you could be able to bring to the table some extremely valuable information and be even better voice of the customer. Now let's take a moment to pause and reflect on this slide. The experience is comprised of many important things, from negotiating the purchase and deployment, to training and to daily usage. And today, we are speaking not about whether it is possible to do something, but whether it is as efficient as enjoyable. There is a common misconception that, say, Instagram does need a good experience. But for the enterprise, it's a bit secondary, as people just have to use it. They don't have choice. And Instagram has much more diverse audience of users who are not trained. Alright, the point is that enterprise users are also very diverse. They can work from offices all over the world, or from home, or they can belong to different generations. It's not uncommon for them to not receive a proper training, or no training at all. And exactly like for Instagram, even a slight improvement helps many people. Millions or thousands of them doesn't really matter. Before we go any further, let us to remind about two concepts: adoption and engagement. Adoption means people start using a product. That's mostly about the fit for purpose, plus the first impression. It's good for initial sales and reporting about the project success. But when we speak about upgrades, about long-term relationships, that's all about engagement. When end user, not their bosses who make decisions, really use the product efficiently, intensively, and as much as they can. They use it not because they are told to, but because it works fine for them. There are plenty of ways for end users to avoid using a product, to find workarounds. Either of you, I suppose, might recall some systems which has been deployed but not really used as intended. For product design, it is crucial to concentrate on adoption flows first. You can't start using product if you say can't get through a registration flow. Remember last time you tried to invent a password and it wasn't accepted 10 times because it needed letters, numbers, symbols, lengths, etc. And then security questions, and then you just need to run for another meeting and will abandon the registration. Adoption is quite easy to calculate. However, where the real success of a project lies, where there is a return of investment for the customer, is engagement, which is much more obscure. And that's where end user feedback is a gift. Designers who are senior enough have a huge experience and know good practices and patterns for any imaginable interactions. But it wouldn't be wise for the company to rely on our expertise only. We need to validate our solutions with customer opinions. And in addition, on top of it, we get a full bunch of gifts from feedback sessions. As an organization, we can easily miss opportunities to improve our products where it really matters. And this isn't unique to any company, including Microsoft or even Apple. We don't want to miss if we want to make outstanding products. We need to listen to our customers about user experience with the same attention and diligence as we listen about features they need. In the end of the day, it's nice to validate some of our solutions well before spending real money on the actual implementation. And as a bonus, customers start feeling that we do care about them. In Objective, we have already taken opportunities to have such feedback gathering sessions. We had a roadmap for Trapeze Professional product. It was full of new features. Then, we've seen end users in 15 councils or so, that kind of people who do stuff with our software, not their bosses. End user sessions are usually like a bucket of cold water, and those ones weren't an exception. The results show the evidence that instead of building new features, we need to nail some of the existing ones. And we had to pivot the roadmap. One might say, we already have plenty of sources of feedback. And that's true. The problem with it is that it's usually feedback from managers, not end users. Or okay, end users, but worded by managers. Remember that childhood game of whispering a phrase through a chain of other kids and getting a completely different phrase in the end? That's what we call lost in translation. But what is the real issue? Let's dive in. Okay, first problem is that we receive negative feedback mainly when something doesn't work at all. Other than that, if you ask somebody's opinion, it would likely be neutral to positive. Because it is much easier and pleasant to say something good. On meetings, you behave and ask very politely and get polite responses. Sure, because it is a norm in enterprise business. Then, good feedback easily gains space in proud company presentations. But it might be delusional. Now please get prepared. It will be a big key slide. By default, people aren't keen to tell you the truth. And here's why. Elementary politeness is the obvious issue we've discussed. But also, we can be pretty proud of our software. It's good, and usually much better than what the customer is used to. Otherwise, why a customer would even consider our software had it been any worse? There are so much of substandard software around, so for many, good enough is enough. But if we want to be outstanding, we need to be aware whether we are really good or just good enough. Generally speaking, people tend to blame themselves if something goes wrong. We're just educated in the way, start from yourself. If I can't figure out something, I start blaming myself not being smart enough, or too lazy, or too poorly trained, or unmotivated, etc. I'll tell you a story. I am a very careful driver, but I got fined for parking twice in a row. It was a very tough period for me when I didn't really have money to afford fines. So I blamed myself a lot. I couldn't find photo of the exact parking sign where I was fined, but it was very close to that masterpiece. Come on, should it be that complex? Is it too complex for end users? I am a professionally trained business analyst, but still failed to decipher that and made a wrong assumption twice. And still blamed myself for my fail, which actually wasn't mine at all. Do you remember what I said about adoption versus engagement? Yes, I still use Sydney parking. I have to. But now I avoid that parking spot close to the office as hell. I have zero engagement. Same is with our users who might think they just need more training and diligence. But the real issue is some things are unnecessarily complex. Please remember these words. Unnecessarily complex. I tried to context my fines without any success. Study parking rules better. The only advice from the council I've got. Is it legal? Yes. Is it any fair? Unsure. Usually, if you need a PhD training to do simple things like parking, something is wrong with the product, not with the lack of training. Lastly, there is a fear of incompetence. You might feel incompetent yourself, even if it isn't your fault. But you unlikely want to show it to your boss, and you would just cringe to show it to an external person. Now text yourself. You're asking a customer, is our software good and you have enough knowledge to use it? Which answer would you likely get? Things are getting more and more complicated, aren't they? And that's exactly what we are trying to achieve in this part of the session. To raise awareness about the validity of feedback you might have had access so far to. But don't stress too much, we'll show several techniques a bit later. Now, let's continue with other problems. Let's suppose you've managed to agree with users to tell the truth and nothing but truth. The thing here is that they might not have the truth readily available. Think of a patient at doctors. Sometimes you get irritated, feel uncomfortable, tired, but it's hard to describe to the doctor the particular reason for that. Actually, it's the doctor's responsibility to find out the cause. Tests, examinations, questionnaires, they might help to find the reason. The patient wasn't aware at all. Experience of using a product may be pretty much the same. User might not know what exactly makes them feel unhappy. They're just not happy enough. Ask them, what's the problem? I just don't like it. There might be users who have lots of guesses about the problems and might even have ready to implemented ideas. You know those situations when some people start taking unprescribed prescription-only drugs and get really sick as a result. We don't want it. We need to listen to the users inside carefully, but we need a lot of skepticism to the users' proposed solutions. Because those solutions would likely be targeted onto the symptom rather than its cause. Finally, if you just ask for a person's opinion, you might get a very generic answer. That's just because users are unlikely to spend time consciously reflecting on their experience. Moreover, some people might not enjoy abstract thinking to generalize successfully. So you have to prepare them. Give context, provoke thinking, provide hints on what kind of answers you expect at all. While doing that, you still need to avoid inducing any positive or negative bias, however. By this moment today, we've discussed quite a few psychological aspects. Those you need to be aware of to mitigate and get proper feedback. Now, let's imagine you can't speak to the users directly. You talk to their bosses instead. What kind of problems you might encounter there? First, bosses usually do very different tasks than their subordinates. Okay, they do the same tasks sometimes, but say boss copies documents himself much less frequently than the clerk whose main job is to copy the documents. So the clerk's wishes for a product might be very different. Second, managers are likely to be more experienced and better trained. After all, it might be the very reason why they became bosses. That said, a task which is easy for a manager might be too complicated for a subordinate. And it also could be the opposite, actually. But there likely to be a gap of complexity perception between them. Now let's be sincere. Some bosses still think their staff could do better. They might be disappointed with how slowly people do tasks, how lazy they are, how they lack dedication for work. It might be true or just in manager's imagination, but that's still a problem. In a case a user does some tasks inefficiently, a manager might want to blame the users rather than the software they use. It really doesn't give us an opportunity to help those users. Lastly, you are aware. You've already been trained to gather feedback. But a user's manager hasn't been trained. He or she just can't gather proper feedback and can't relay it to you. We need to speak to end users and speak directly. Does it make any sense now why? I will just show you a funny illustration of a very typical situation. Okay, here is an user. He looks on some toolbar and starts complaining. I always have to guess which button is for editing, and we rarely need to do anything else besides editing. Now, their boss will have a conversation with our representative. Maybe it will be account manager or PM or somebody like that. And he says, your software is unnecessarily complicated. It requires too much training. Our PM says, okay, we should just write more help and make it more visible on this toolbar. He then relays it to our designer. The designer just complies. Okay, no problem. We'll do that for you. We will make help even more visible and add explanation into help. No problem at all. And then it has been developed. And boss says, my guys don't bother to read help. And even if I push them, they still can't remember anything. Because the cause isn't cured. The manager blames his users, deadlines, business processes, our consultants, our software in general, developers and designers. Just not their real cause. Pathetic story, isn't it? Okay, well, I exaggerated a lot, but you got the idea. Now let's simplify the chain. Let's even make it not a chain anymore. Let's make it a dialogue, a collaboration, which is actually called a UX workshop, or user research session, or user testing session, whatever you want to call it. Boss and PM might still be there, but they are just to organize the workshop and to feel comfortable about what will happen there. In some workshops I've done, they just introduced people and then disappeared to let us do what we needed. Those were very productive sessions. You know, a patient is much more comfortable to discuss his problems with a doctor if his boss is not present in this room. Now again, end user. I always have to guess which button is for editing. And we rarely need to do anything else besides editing. Now designer, he asks some additional questions about it, and then comes up with his solution. Done. That's it. I hope By this time, you are convinced that gathering feedback needs a professional approach. Now I'm going to stop whining about problems and will proceed to particular solutions and techniques. If you're going to have a session, you need to invite different people. Even when the session is performed by a designer, you, as the customer-facing person, might have a better understanding of who does what. You want to invite people with different proficiency with the product, different level of responsibilities, different demographics. But keep a group small. As we have already discussed, you need a pretty intimate atmosphere to discuss hot topics. And you are going to be obsessed with tiny details, which takes time. Each attendee should have enough time to think and speak. So if you want to fit into 90 to 120 minutes, keep the group small or just split it into several independent sessions. To save sessions time and set proper expectations, ensure that each participant gets an agenda beforehand. It will make them comfortable, might raise some interest, and allow them to prepare if they want to. Most people will attend a UX workshop for the first time in their life, and it might be a bit frightening. If you have ever visited any business training, you know that feeling. To feel for other people is called empathy. That is a key thing you want to develop before you organize a workshop. I hope the bunch of problems we have discussed before will help you with the empathy. You will unlikely to be able to cover the whole agenda within less than 90 minutes. From my experience, 1 hour is almost always not enough. You don't want to rush in the end of the workshop, because in that part you're likely to get the most valuable feedback. But you also don't want to rush in the beginning, as otherwise you risk the crucial atmosphere of trust and context. Rarely you can exclude any of those 10 steps or change their sequence. The only thing, you might not be presenting any new ideas, so then you just remove steps 7 and 8. Other than that, I'd recommend to stick to the structure, as it's proven to be quite efficient. We will discuss details of each step now. When I discuss workshops basics, the atmosphere is usually the most painful topic. You might be used to formal meetings with the customers, where there is a certain businessy tone, manners, and a certain distance. And the customer is used to it as well. However, as we are now aware of problems of getting sincere feedback, it becomes very clear that we need a very different atmosphere for UX sessions. Think of a friendly chat over lunch with peers in an office kitchen. You can't be really serious when colleagues open those lunch boxes with random food, which doesn't look like from a restaurant. You expect them to use strong colloquial words when discussing latest news, sports, politics, etc. Should you touch any sensitive topic like COVID situation, most people immediately become quite verbal and either intensively oppose or support you. You want something like that. You need to see an emotional response. Does that make sense? Your best ally there is the boss of participants. As you're an alien there, people would likely follow their boss' advice rather than yours. Explain that stuff about the desired atmosphere to the boss beforehand and ask him or her, not your, to explicitly say to participants that they are allowed and expected to be verbal. It is completely safe to tell opinions, and nobody will be offended, and nobody would judge them. Make sure people truly believe and accept the game rules. It is good if you can have a session with end users without their bosses present in the room. But that's a rare luxury. So just get prepared that managers might be very outspoken, while the rest of the participants wouldn't like to disagree with their manager in front of you, an external person. Provoke people with probing questions like, does anybody have a different experience? Or say something like, I need an alternative opinion on that. Is there any? The manager may even try to stop some of the participants. In this case, politely ask to allow them to finish. Say that you need different opinions, even if they might look a bit weird. Usually, there are some very active participants, and the rest are sitting quietly. Make friends with those active ones, as in the future they could be your allies when championing the product, its upgrades, and even integrating it better into customers' business processes. The quiet ones could be quiet because of plenty of reasons. They might be just irrelevant. Say, they don't really use the product, don't have an opinion yet, too tired, and so on. That's okay. What you really need to probe, whether they are quiet because they are afraid of their manager, or too shy to interrupt other wordy colleagues, or are uncomfortable to say something negative or different from what's been already said. Use your gut feeling for that. Try to ask a quiet person directly, and once they start to speak, don't allow anybody to interrupt. You need to protect them, politely but firmly. Make a compliment while they are speaking, like, "Wow, that's a very valuable detail." And just another advice, try to side with users. It's much easier to criticize a third person rather than you. Say that you're here to check how well developers implement things for them. To criticize those invisible developers feels more safe. Ask their consent to play dumb and ask dumb questions about obvious things. You might be surprised how far your obvious and theirs could be. One of my favorite techniques is to ask emotionally and with gestures, something like, "What makes you mad? Mad? Really mad?" People start smiling and pick up the game. The genie question is also a part of the game, and we will return to it in a minute. Before delving into the workshop, get to know each participant. Any feedback is much better if you know the context of who is speaking. We would also need to know their environment, like what the monitors they use, when, and are there any distractions, etc. It would be good if they also could show you their desks after the session. We've discussed the importance of the atmosphere several times already. And you might want to scream, "That's clear enough, let's move on." But you need to reiterate these three things to ensure it's absolutely clear for everyone else. And finally, you start. You need somebody to volunteer to show their daily mundane tasks. Most of the time, you don't need anything really complex, just basic things. That exercise is good because of two things. First, it obviously allows you to see firsthand how the product is used in reality and compare with how it is expected to be used. High time to ask those stupid questions and ask to explain that to grandma. In addition, it puts everybody in the room into some context, and opinions start to take shape and ripen. It's a great topic starter, which you could then ask to elaborate on. To make this demo happen, ask the organizer to prepare beforehand. That, for example, might be a user's laptop connected to the projector. They need to be sure all necessary hardware is present. They know Wi-Fi password, log into the product, etc. If you don't ask for it beforehand, you will definitely lose half of your session on setting up. Even if you ask, you will likely will. What shouldn't be prepared beforehand is the demo itself. The organizer might prepare some ideas of what to show as a backup if participants struggle to come up with it straight away. But that's it. For example, they can say, "Hey, just show them how you did that last Friday. Do you remember that occasion?" You need to see the whole process. For example, if it involves finding something outside of our product, like say, finding a file to open, it is also a part of experience, and there could be some gems. Ask the person to comment on what they are doing and especially why so. You might need to use 5 whys technique. Don't overuse it. But if some reasoning and motivation looks unclear, that's the way how to get to the real point. Like, why? Because I was told that at the training. Why they suggested that? Because they thought we would make some mistakes otherwise. Why they thought that? Was it really likely? And then put all of your attention onto observation. It is better to be able to see the faces, and that's why it's good to have the session offline, not over a video call. Notice struggles, inconveniences, non-verbal cues. Pay attention to those ums, ahs, and shits. Note them and ask to explain them after the demo. And then use strong words when probing. Show me a thing you really hate. Or is there anything you really love? You want negative feedback, but everybody is much more comfortable if there is some positive feedback as well. Very positive, not just neutral. Feedback is equally important as negative one. Now it is a culmination of the session, the genie question. All you were doing before was mostly a preparation for it. You need a bit wordy explanation to put everybody into a fairy tale atmosphere where a genie would accomplish any of wishes about the products. 3 wishes per each participant. You do need a genie, as otherwise people start limit themselves because of real life constraints. Provoke them. Like, maybe wish something less humble. It's a real genie. First, there could be some possibilities for us to develop which customers aren't even aware. Maybe even we ourselves aren't aware as well. Second, once they wish something too fantastic, discuss it in depth and then cut into more realistic features. Like, you want the genie to put all images into folders automatically, but you don't want him to collate them randomly. How would you then explain the genie how to do it right? He's very smart and he will understand. It is perfectly fine if same wishes are repeated, and then can even include some points discussed during previous exercises. This just means they are really important. On some workshops, you might even want to make a dot voting. Like, all wishes are written on a whiteboard. Then each participant has 3 dots he can put near wishes he likes the most. He can vote for 3 different wishes, or can put 2 or even 3 of his dots against one wish. And when recording the wishes, do your best to note its author's name. We've discussed that suggestions are more valuable in context of a persona. Some of the workshops are just exploratory, where you can only capture thoughts on existing problems. But after 3 to 5 exploratory workshops, you might have a good idea of solutions to propose. But please refrain to discuss any proposed solutions until this moment in the workshop. Otherwise, you might induce bias, which would make the whole thing invalid. It is fine if you have just a PowerPoint preso with still images. However, most people are very visual and concrete rather than abstract. So clickable sequences of screen with nice real-like data on them help comprehension immensely. And real applications frequently use animations to show how one object expands or morphs into another one. This is not for entertainment, it is to make things more clear. So, if you can show an animated prototype or a video, that's much better. You've noticed it. We discussed about setting the atmosphere for so long, but the rest of slides are pretty quick, haven't you? That's just because if the atmosphere is right, you will inevitably have lots of discussions on each step, and you might even need to ask people to move on. If there are no discussions, move back to the atmosphere. The rest is not a rocket science at all. Okay, you've just heard wishes to the genie and you're presenting new solutions. If there is some intersections between them, Try to align your presentation to the wishes on the fly. Ask participants whether the genie doing right with their wishes. Discuss what's similar and what's different. The genie is smart enough, but he needs some help. He's been sitting in the lamp for centuries, you know. If you feel there is no alignment at all, you just need a different set of solutions, different set of ideas for the next session. If there is some misalignment and you already know what to change in the prototype, do that before the next session as well. The whole idea of this step is to adjust prototypes quickly and refine them in the process. In the very end of the session, on the way out of the customer's office, it's nice to have a look on people's desks. We need to know what other software they use, how they organize their computer desktop, and their real desk as well. It might help us to understand their mental models and better help to build integrations with different software. We also need to know how much distraction they have during work. User interfaces may differ dramatically depending on that. Multi-monitor configurations and how windows are split between screens give us some ideas of how our software is embedded into the rest of their processes. It is not uncommon that after a workshop ends, somebody can have new ideas. The French call it esprit d'escalier, the stairs effect. It likely has happened to you as well. You know, you've had a dispute with somebody, walked down the stairs, and then suddenly found better arguments for the dispute. Or you found them when taking shower next morning. But that's too late. If you can, make it possible for participants to follow up with their new ideas. Maybe even those quiet people can send you an email with ideas they were too shy to tell. Who knows? And again, wrapping up the session, make sure you are friends with the most enthusiastic participants. They will be the champions and will influence decision makers. If you feel you will be able to adjust to your presentation to fulfill wishes to the genie, agree on another meeting. Customers would love to see the progress and that their wishes start taking shape. Now we're moving close to the end. Just a bit of advice on how to make notes and process them. Some people prefer to take an audio recorder to the session. If you do that, don't forget to ask everybody's permission. But you don't want to rely on the tape because it takes ages to listen to it and take out valuable points. But you might need it as a backup if you've missed something in your notes, or use it as an evidence in meetings with other colleagues. But that's it. I also don't recommend to type your notes. First, typing distracts you from the conversation. It is hard to talk and type at the same time, and is even a bit impolite. Second, when you type, you inevitably, subconsciously try to find better words and concentrate on sentences to describe the situation. You type and delete. It all takes time, and you don't want to interrupt a conversation for that. You're not going to save time anyway, as after the meeting you would update those notes. Instead, write your notes. Even if your handwriting is awful, use shortenings, abbreviations, symbols, and arrows between words. Instead of full sentences, just put keywords and landmarks. It is called sketchnoting. Later, when you come back to your office, you will have plenty of time to make full sentences out of it. But please, not in the real time. Best things you can do is to collect direct speech, especially those strong opinions. Later, they might even become popular memes in the product team. It's one of the greatest tools to raise empathy amongst the developers. And again, attribute your notes to people and to the situation about which they were said. You won't be able to do that all time, but at least try to. Here are some good examples of quotes. You know, NPS score is a wonderful tool, but those quotes are very humane and thus are extremely convincing. Quotes can describe the real problem, the core issue, and much better than a formal report. It doesn't hold it. That's the real issue with a stamp. On the contrary, we need a template feature to save text and stamps is not a problem. It's just a solution, proposed solution which can be quite wrong. I have recommended to use brief written notes. Now, I strongly recommend to decipher those notes soon after the workshop, the very same day, or worst case, the next day's morning. Otherwise, you'll lose context of your notes. You'll lose meaning of the contractions, who said what, and why it seemed important at that moment. Start with a flat bulleted list. Don't try to make any structure, just type everything. It will allow you to concentrate on your memories and recover more details. Then, do the second stage, called thematic analysis. Make your flat list a multi-level list. Move items up and down, arrange into categories. That way you will make it more digestible for your colleagues. It will be also a provision for PowerPoint presentation of your findings. And you will automatically get a summary from high-level list items. Voila! But to avoid disappointment, plan ahead that you will spend on doing that report at least the same time as the workshop itself, or likely even more. That's normal. And to make it sound positive, it's at least twice faster than deciphering audio recordings. Getting feedback is a hard work. Trying to concentrate on getting negative feedback is daunting. But after all of that, you will be rewarded with good feedback. Yes, it is your reward. It indicates we've finally nailed it. They were irritated but couldn't say why. They had no idea what to ask, and they definitely weren't interested in technical details and funky buzzwords. They just liked that we really listened and that we were considering to give them what they really wanted. Yes, you heard it right. We haven't given it them. We just showed what we were considering to give. After Trapeze Pro series of workshops, 73% of customers we visited decided to upgrade to a new version even way before the developers will be able to implement all the proposed changes. Not because we promised something, not at all. We haven't even promised it. That's just because we've shown that we listen and truly care. From UX perspective, it is much better to thank you verbally than just write it on the slide. So thank you very much for your attention. And instead of almost empty thank you slide, we'll repeat there the main points. If there is a Q&A session after a presentation, that last slide may stay on the screen for a longer time than any other. We hope that we have earned some more allies from you. Thank you again, and let's work for our customer together.